Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Let me know how I sound. Give me a sound check. Let me know if I'm aligned. I'm a little worried that there's some lag going on. Let me know. I might have to refresh if that's the case. Put you all on Be Right Back. I'm here. It's been a while. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Let me know how I sound. Let me know if there's any lag. And also, let me know if you can hear my air conditioner. It is the summertime and it is hot. I don't think I've ever been hotter than I was in China, though. China in the summer is so hot. Okay, so no lag or anything. Great. Welcome back, everyone. I missed all of you. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight. At the end of the program, I'm going to go into depth about my trip to China. I was just in China for 10 full days. It wasn't enough. Believe me, it was not it was not enough. You all in the chat are making me laugh right now. It was not enough time. Not at all. 4 cities in 10 days. It was a whirlwind. I don't think I've ever taken so many planes in my life in such a short period. But we are going to have a good time today. So, with that said, everyone like this stream. So tonight, a lot of different people are streaming, good friends of mine. And so I have a pro tip for you. So like this stream, if you're bouncing around streams, a great thing to do is to just instead, you can pick whoever is your favorite, whoever you want to see. Hopefully that's me. But regardless, what you can do, a great thing to do is open another tab, put the video in that tab, and let it play on mute so that your favorite YouTubers get that watch time live. That helps attract more viewers. That's how YouTube works. That's how the YouTube algorithm works to some degree. And on another note, though, liking this stream while you're here is very helpful. Today, I lost over 100 subscribers like that, everybody. I mean, I'm not kidding. It was like that. I refreshed my YouTube studio and 100 were gone. So the suppression is very, very real. So make sure you're subscribing to this channel. Check to see if you're still subscribed, hitting that notifications bell so you know when I go live. And I also, while I was in China, lost a lot of income. People are struggling. It's hard times out here, but I am still doing an equipment drive, and all of this travel has definitely dwindled my funds. So please do consider becoming a paid member. On Patreon is the best place. Substack is the second best place. And of course, YouTube membership is also a great option. All of those things can be found in the links in the description. You can also hit that join button. And I know that there are several YouTube members who watch my show regularly, and I really appreciate it. Patreon members as well, Substack, everybody. So all that can be found in the description below or hitting that join button on YouTube. With that said, everybody, we have a packed show today. So I'm going to start with the stories that I want to cover geopolitically before I get to the China trip. And I want to emphasize today geopolitics being about politics. Sometimes that gets missed a bit, right? The idea that geopolitics are a political struggle. So when we talk about de-dollarization and Brics, which we are going to get to today, when we talk about the NATO Summit, we should always be thinking about politics. What is the struggle for power going on worldwide? What does that look like? Whose interests are being met? Whose are not? What is that struggle? That is really what I think is most important, because some people get lost in the details, right? Oh, de-dollarization. Is it going to happen for a long time? Doesn't matter. If countries like Russia, China, Iran, we can go on and on, across the global south, are charting a course for true sovereignty. They'll eventually get to the moment where the dollar is no longer relevant at some point. But building the mechanisms for true self-determination and sovereignty, developing that political struggle through cooperation and solidarity, that is truly the essence of geopolitics. And I just want to put that out there because I think that can get lost. So I'm going to get into a few stories. We have the NATO summit, a lot of chaotic, so much happened at this NATO summit, and it was pretty wacky, pretty chaotic. A lot happened, and we're going to get into it. We're going to get into Zelensky being rejected. Everybody hurts. REM on replay. Thanks to Don Bastavushka for posting all the great memes. And thank you for Don Bastavushka for the thumbnail. They helped me out on a volunteer basis, really, with things like this. And they're great people. So follow them on Telegram. I think it's at DD Geopolitics, or just search Don Bastavushka on Telegram. With all that said, though, we're going to get into the NATO summit. We're going to get into what else? Brics. We're going to talk about the gold-backed currency. We're going to watch a couple of reports, one from RT, one from the folks at the Duran, friends of the show, have been on the show several times. And we're going to talk about this upcoming summit because we had the NATO summit. Then we're going to have the Brics summit coming up early next month, which is going to be monumental because all of these building blocks and mechanisms for the Brics countries are starting to fall into place. And we're going to talk about it, okay? So that's one thing, okay? Those are two things. And then if we have time, we're going to get into the ways in which China has struck back at Europe, because Europe now is getting very, very hypocritical and inconsistent with its China policy, in particular, the realm of economic warfare. We'll get into that if we have time, but if we don't, we're going to get straight into my trip to China. Why was I in China for 10 days? Yes, I met many Communist Party of China members. Oh no, am I truly an agent of the Communist Party of China? Or is it just that the Communist Party of China is the ruling party, and really any self-respecting country that hosts delegations would have the ruling party in some way or another lead them? I don't know, but you'll find out later in the program. You'll find out all the cities I visited, what I did there. I got to meet some incredible people. I was on a delegation. I'm telling you, I was on a delegation with the Vice Minister of Culture from Cuba, with the former Egyptian ambassador to China. I was with really high-level people. Honestly, I felt out of place sometimes because here I am, a U.S.-based journalist. I was the only American invited on this delegation that wasn't already living in China. And let's just say that in and of itself was a kind of experience that is hard to repeat. It is difficult to repeat. It's difficult to really describe to you what that feels like. So, with all that said, everyone, we're about to get started. So hit that like button, hit that notifications bell, and please do support this work, okay? Because this work, I'm about to roll out a whole lot of new features in as this summer moves forward, especially for paid subscribers on Patreon, on YouTube, and on Substack. Patreon is the best place, however, where you will get the most exclusive features. So patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong, with a wink and a nod that indeed most of my substantial work in the realm of media will, of course, be free and open to everyone because I am not a paywall kind of guy. Let's get started, all right? So, the NATO Summit. I don't even know where to begin with this because so much happened in the last few days at the NATO Summit. It was yesterday. It was July 11th and 12th. Okay, with some I'm in the United States, so there's some time zone issues. But a lot happened at this NATO Summit. And of course, you have a coronation, right? I'm not going to read this whole article to you, but I'm going to show you that the Western corporate media, the Western mainstream media, has tried to paint the NATO Summit as a big success, right? A big success for the Biden administration. And here we go. They say, despite successes at the NATO Summit, divisions remain. So we need to talk about that. So here you see that at the NATO Summit, some things did get done. Okay, some things indeed did get done. You had Sweden finally get the nod, right? It's finally going to be able to formally join NATO after Turkey decided to basically end its year-long resistance to membership of Sweden. So that is going to happen very soon. You also have these so-called, as New York Times calls it, new ambitions for itself and long-term support for Ukraine. Read that nothing changed there. These countries, the collective West, were always going to support Ukraine through and through in a type of permanent warfare. So nothing really changed there. Promising NATO membership someday, they said. And this is what we really need to talk about, because it says here Kiev wanted more. So I'm not going to read you the whole article, but the point is this is kind of how to summarize what happened at the NATO summit. You had on the one hand Turkey, and this isn't the first thing that Turkey did leading up to this summit that indicated that it was going to give major concessions to the collective West. You also had Turkey basically stabbing Putin in the back, saying that Ukraine deserved NATO membership in the days leading up. I was in China following this at the time, basically saying that Ukraine deserved NATO membership, holding pretty high-level talks with NATO counterparts, and then at the summit, essentially saying, Sweden, you can have NATO membership. Now I'm going to let go of support. Turkey did get concessions, and so I understand that there is this tit for tat. But in the main, in my opinion, this is something that Erdogan and Turkey has done in the past to Russia, become close, but then, of course, kind of stab them in the back. You know about Turkey shooting down the Russian plane during the war on Syria, during Russia's assistance to Syria. A lot of complexities in that relationship between Turkey and Russia. But the point is that Sweden is now in NATO. Now, there are now new so-called security assurances to Ukraine, supposedly, but not really. So this is what is so important to note about this summit, is that Ukraine really got nothing. And so the memes were abound. Just check the thumbnail of this stream, okay? The memes were abound of Zelensky with a janitor's broom, a janitor's mop. This is how tall you need to be to join NATO, because Ukraine got no assurances that it would ever really join NATO, other than maybe someday you will. And this really angered Zelensky. And this was a hilarious exchange that exposed the outright corruption of this whole arrangement between the collective West, between NATO and Ukraine. Because what you essentially had was Kiev begging and hoping that this was going to be the summit, that they were assured, not just assured membership, but given the specific conditions for how they were going to join NATO. And NATO said, nope, we're not going to give you conditions. Actually, we're just going to let you know the conditions when we know them, and then you're just going to have to meet them even if you don't know them. This is how absurd all of this is. This is how absurd all of this is. Basically, NATO said to Ukraine, not this time, and I'll tell you why. It's because Ukraine isn't doing well. The whole point of this summit was supposed to be a victory lap. It was supposed to be Ukraine's spring counteroffensive being successful so that NATO could say with assurances that, yeah, Ukraine, you did a good job, thank you, and now you'll get membership into NATO. But that's not what happened, and that's exactly why there were major divisions at this summit. So let's talk about one of these divisions, and it probably is the most important one. It is the division between NATO and Zelensky, between Washington, really, and Zelensky. So this kind of came and went, but it was still significant because NATO eventually tamed Zelensky and petted him on the head and said, be careful what you're doing there, son, because we will take care of you if you say the wrong thing again. So while this came and went, it still indicated something very important in that there is trouble in the waters in this conflict. So here you have the United States was furious about a tweet that Zelensky made at the NATO summit, while at the NATO summit, when he found out that there wasn't specific security guarantees that included the specifics to a pathway toward NATO membership. He said that the bloc's indecisiveness about Kiev joining the NATO alliance was a sign of quote unquote weakness. So the U.S. delegation that was attending the NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, is furious, quote unquote, over a tweet by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky in which he criticized the military alliance for its reluctance to provide a concrete roadmap for Kiev's accession to the bloc, the Washington Post reported. Now, mind you, in the lead up to the NATO summit, there was a scramble between Germany, the UK, all these countries were meeting together saying, how do we put together these conditions to satisfy Ukraine without actually satisfying Ukraine? Because that's what was actually going on. They didn't want to offer NATO membership from the beginning, and I'll get to that in a second. He called the omissions, this is what Zelensky said on Twitter, that he had been informed on the final text of the joint communique issued at the summit would not include a timeline for membership for Ukraine into NATO. He called it, quote unquote, unprecedented and absurd. And he suggested that this indecisiveness on the issue is a sign of weakness. Zelensky claimed that Kiev's Western backers had decided to bargain Ukraine's membership in NATO in negotiations with Russia. Members of the U.S. delegation were furious, they said, after learning about the Ukrainian leader's message. The paper pointed out that Zelensky blasting, this is the Washington Post, blasting the alliance stood in stark contrast to the image of Western harmony that U.S. President Joe Biden and his aides had been projecting at the event. So essentially what Zelensky was saying here, so that's the beginning of that's what happened, right? Zelensky says that he's fighting to the end. That actually NATO official told the Washington Post that Zelensky's tweet puts pressure on the alliance to say, I'm fighting to the end. So this is Zelensky in a power play. But most people in NATO, surrounding NATO, thought he went too far. And you know what? He probably did. Because let's be honest, this is something that Zelensky has been doing for quite some time. He has been, even though he's not a very big person, right? He's not, but he has been attempting to stand tall to the collective West only when it serves him, not the Ukrainian people, not the international order as a whole, not peace, not anything like that, not to maybe clean up the corruption, maybe stop supporting the fascists and the Nazis, none of that. Actually, when Zelensky has stood up to the collective West, what he really has been doing is throwing temper tantrums to them, saying, give me more, give me more. You remember U.S. Congress early in this conflict when he presented to U.S. Congress in his sort of military fatigue sweater getup. When he did that, you remember what he said. Thanks for your support, but it's not enough. Right? And this is after tens of billions of dollars of pledges. Now Ukraine has already received even more than that, nearly $100 billion. I believe it's $100 billion total, with over $50+ billion worth of weapons, over the last short period of time, right? This conflict is not that long still. It's only been about a year and a half. But over that year and a half, Ukraine has been pumped with tens of billions in weaponry, and still it's not enough. Now, Zelensky has a point to a degree. It really isn't enough because Russia steamrolled that counteroffensive. When was the last time you heard about this counteroffensive having any prospect for success? And this is why Zelensky is desperate for direct NATO intervention. That's why he was so angry. He's not angry for the Ukrainian people. He's not angry about Ukraine's sovereignty. He's not angry about the state of the world order. He is scared for himself. And that's why he lashed out in this way. And him lashing out really angered the United States. And you could say on the one hand that perhaps they should be angry. There's been a lot of talk about gratitude. And I got to say one thing about this whole gratitude. Yeah, Zelensky maybe should have more gratitude because NATO is really the single pillar holding up his bankrupt and corrupt and outright fascistic political rule. But at the same time, this is what you call a puppet gone mad. Zelensky is a puppet gone mad. He's not a legitimate political leader. He is the product of the 2014 coup. He conned his way into the 2019 election victory. He is backed by Kolomoisky, I believe his name is, this huge billionaire that basically bankrolled his campaign and used the campaign as a kind of propaganda arm of a kind of new regime that could basically and essentially fight this conflict with Russia to the last Ukrainian. So Zelensky's just a puppet gone mad. And I am not going to sit here and say he should have gratitude when it was NATO that created and spawned this monster, because that's what he is. He's a monster. That's what they all are. They're all monsters. They all sit around a table to plan and plot monstrous things on behalf of the military industrial complex and Wall Street. That's what NATO is. U.S. hegemony projected with a European kind of North Atlantic alliance face. That is what NATO is. So Zelensky was very vocal, and it didn't last long, however, because by the second day of this summit, he had a different tune. He sang a different tune, Mr. Zelensky did. He wasn't talking so big anymore. Zelensky was much more amenable to what NATO had essentially accomplished during the summit, which in my opinion isn't much, but I'll get into that in a second. So Kiev understands, says Zelensky, that it cannot become a member of the bloc while in conflict with Russia, says the Ukrainian leader. The results of the NATO summit in Lithuania were very good, quote unquote, said Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, despite not receiving an invitation to join NATO. Ukraine is and always will be a donor of our common security, he said, insisting at the joint press conference with NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg in Vilnius on Wednesday. I think that Ukraine needs NATO as much as NATO needs Ukraine. Zelensky stated it is logical and understandable that some are afraid to talk about our membership in NATO because no one wants to start a world war. Oh, is that right, Zelensky? But just the day before, you were talking about how NATO essentially needs to have a really strict timeline for when you'll get membership. And really, you know what Zelensky wanted. He wanted membership to be to have a timeline as soon as possible. Right? He wants to be in NATO now because he wants to invoke Article 5 and say you have a responsibility to directly intervene against Russia, which would inevitably lead to world war. So this is Zelensky talking out of both sides of his mouth. But he continues that the G7 and U.S. allies are confirming guarantees today, and I'm sure it will happen. Now, those guarantees never came. There's no real guarantees here other than there will be more arming of Ukraine. There will be F-16s now going to Ukraine, but nothing that's going to change the course of the battlefield. No boots on the ground, no fly zone, nothing like that. Nothing that will change the situation on the ground at all. So Zelensky insisted that the G7's security guarantees. So this is what happened, right? When NATO couldn't agree to security guarantees, the G7 scrambled and said, oh, we'll give you security guarantees. Mind you, this is an economic bloc. This is not legitimate, right? This is not legitimate at all. Basically, if you're talking about the G7 giving security guarantees, you might as well be just living in a delusion. There's no such thing as a G7 security guarantees. These countries are blocked out of economic reasons, and they're just essentially trying to project that they have things figured out where NATO does not. So they shouldn't be a substitute, he said, however, for NATO membership. Security guarantees must be made on Ukraine's way towards NATO. So, according to Zelensky, Kiev also reached major agreements with Western backers regarding new military packages. A shortage of long-range weapons remains a problem for the Ukrainian military, Zelensky said, adding that he would raise this issue during talks with U.S. President Joe Biden. Zelensky lashed out at NATO on social media, claiming its indecisiveness on Ukraine's membership bid was a sign of weakness. So there you go. he changed his tune. He said, on the one hand, that Ukraine is unhappy, right? That he is unhappy that they did not receive a timeline for NATO membership and called NATO weak. And then the next day he says, oh, wait. Actually, what came out of this summit is in fact beneficial. We did get what we wanted except for NATO membership. That's it, right? So that is how you tame and discipline a puppet. Basically, what Zelensky was told was, you went a little too far there, buddy, and you got to rein it in. So those are the major stories of the NATO summit, really. And now it's time, right? Because you had Turkey, okay? You had Turkey allow Sweden to join NATO. You had Turkey also get guarantees for F-16s itself from the United States, I believe, if not the collective West. And you also had Ukraine, the U.S. changing its tune completely now and saying it's going to give F-16s to Ukraine. And you had these amorphous security guarantees supposedly given to Ukraine, which really just means continue to give Ukraine weapons, and it's not going to change anything on the battlefield. So really what you had at the NATO summit was an utter and complete failure. You had NATO come into this thinking that this was going to be the time where it was going to be able to project some kind of pathway for Ukraine to get into NATO. And the only way it could do that is if Russia was on the ropes. But Russia isn't on the ropes. Russia right now is in a really good position, not just on the battlefield, but it is truly, as I said, geopolitics is about politics. And we have to look at not just how souped up and well-equipped Russia's military is, but how well-positioned is Russia in the world right now. And it's in a good position. Domestically, its political rule is consolidated and stabilized. Economically, it is actually going to surpass the 0.7% growth, the less than 1% growth projected by the IMF earlier last year. It is actually going to surpass that already in 2023. And this isn't to mention that Russia does not have ammunition shortages. It does not have shortages of any kind on the military front, and it still has many troops that it can deploy, despite the fact that just a couple of weeks ago, we had a so-called coup being staged by Wagner, led by Prigozhin, or at least a section of Wagner. Yet none of that, none of the sanctions, none of the quirks and developments that have come out of this special military operation, and nothing on the battlefield has changed the fact that Russia's position throughout this conflict has only strengthened. So NATO came into this already in a losing position. NATO came into this without the outcome that it wanted. If you remember last year, NATO essentially said that we're going to target two countries, Russia and China. Russia in the immediate sense, China later. China's malicious. Russia is the biggest threat right now. They repeated the same thing here without much changing on the scene, except Russia basically making work out of, in a war of attrition, making not quick work, but steady work out of Ukraine's military. It has gone through 1, 2, 3 Ukrainian militaries, and it hasn't lost one itself. So Zelensky lashing out in this way, and also the divides among the NATO states. Basically, you had the United States, you had Germany, you had France, you had some European countries say, we don't want direct confrontation with Russia. That's why we can't seem to agree on a pathway to membership. And I have to say, there isn't going to be NATO membership for Ukraine. Let's just be very honest here, because NATO membership for Ukraine is not just a red line for Russia. It's really the line. It is the reason why Russia is fighting this conflict. It is one of the principal, if not the principal reason, because what NATO membership would do, it would give these fascist, not, NAZI forces, it would give Ukraine's government basically cover, full military cover from NATO, not just piecemeal, not just sending weapons, old weapons, not just sending it in piecemeal, but it would give a kind of responsibility, almost a diktat, to NATO countries to defend Ukraine by any means necessary. Now, of course, there are loopholes in that, because I think Article 5's language literally says if deemed necessary, meaning that I guess NATO could say, no, 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 this isn't necessary. Right? It might not fall into the same line as, let's say, what happened in Libya, when basically NATO went all in to drop tens of thousands of sorties on that African country to destroy it. Perhaps NATO would say, oh, this isn't deemed necessary, because they know the consequences, regardless if Ukraine was a NATO member or not. But regardless of whether you believe that there's any kind of rationality in the brains of these neocon hawks, these neocon chicken hawks, I think is secondary to the reality that Ukraine knows, and I think NATO knows, that the only way Ukraine is going to survive this conflict is if Ukraine gets direct intervention from NATO. And that's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen right now, because the situation is just not ripe for that. It is not ripe for such an intervention. Russia is in too strong of a position. And there is that, I think, pesky reality that should that come about, what do you think is going to happen? Well, nuclear war is going to happen. And now I'm going to close on this story by talking about Turkey, because I think one of the most interesting things about this development here is that Turkey has essentially been, from the beginning, playing all sides. And I think that there's some unwarranted enthusiasm for Turkey, maybe some admiration for a political leader that may not deserve it so much, because Erdogan in Syria, and this is my litmus test, Erdogan in Syria was a disaster, right? Turkey was a disaster in that conflict, helped the U.S. occupy territory, helped smuggle that oil, still is, I believe. Well, I know that they had their cooling off period of late, but all the way up until this year, smuggling oil, smuggling resources, arming proxy groups, and working with the United States quite closely, especially in the intelligence realm, to essentially destroy that country. So we have to understand that Turkey has its own ambitions. While Turkey is definitely for a multipolar world to a certain extent, it does not want to see Russia fall or China fall. These are countries that are very important partners for Turkey, and certainly doesn't want to see them destabilize. And that's why it doesn't support the war wholesale against Russia or China. But at the same time, Turkey has its own ambitions. Turkey has a kind of Ottomanist imperialist vision. It has a vision to be its own kind of empire. It wants to be a regional power to a degree much greater than it is right now. And that's why Turkey just can't be trusted in that way. And Russia has known this for quite some time. Russia has known this from the beginning of NATO's encirclement of Russia, beginning more than a decade ago. And of course, what really spurred it to a great degree was the 2008 Bush era indication that Ukraine was going to join NATO at some point. So Russia has been aware of Turkey's political situation and how it relates, and that it can't always be trusted. And we have to understand that this NATO summit brought out, I think, all of the contradictions. What happens in geopolitics, what happens in global politics, what happens in conflicts that involve forces, right? The forces for multipolarity, self-determination against the hegemonists, against the unipolarists, those who want to see essentially US and allied forces dominate the planet at the expense of the majority. When you have that conflict going on, there are always going to be moments that are incredibly acute that tell us exactly what moment we are in. And that was this NATO summit. You had Sweden join, which is a disaster for the world. It is only going to prolong not just the Ukraine conflict, but perhaps lead to more conflicts, and only strengthen and firm up Russia's resolve to defend itself from NATO aggression, because Sweden is pretty close to Russia. It's a big disaster. It brings us that much closer to nuclear war. Then you also have the F-16s to Ukraine, and of course F-16s out of Turkey. You have F-16s being thrown around. Who knows when they'll be usable? Congress has to pass them, I know, for Ukraine, Turkey, etc. I know that there are limitations, and I know that it's not going to change the battlefield outcome, but politically, what it tells Russia is NATO is in it, not to win it per se, but it's in it to prolong it, to wage permanent war. And that message is well received, and Russia is going to keep preparing in that way. And then, of course, you had Turkey over the last several weeks giving all indications that it is opening an embrace to the collective West and will be helping the collective West not just get Sweden into NATO, but perhaps get Ukraine into NATO. And that is a pretty big stab in the back to Russia, which has been a very fair partner to Turkey. So these are the big developments. And of course, you had Zelensky's extremely embarrassing and humiliating outburst, and also his isolation. So you not only had him be invited to this summit, but he also had these outbursts and then seemed to be off in the corner. He seemed to be really in a sad place. And it just goes to show that no matter how much a puppet tries to become the puppet master, or perhaps becomes emboldened to demand from puppet masters things for which he cannot get, or for which they cannot get, it just goes to show that a puppet is a puppet is a puppet. If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it is a duck. And that's what Zelensky is. So you had all of that plus the China story. All right. The China story. And let's get into the China side of this, okay? Because there's a lot to talk about here as well. And I was in China when a lot of the buildup was happening for this. So at the NATO Summit, okay, you had NATO essentially first did it again. I invited New Zealand, Australia, South Korea, Japan. There was that dynamic. So there was that dynamic, and that angered China. China said, why are you inviting regional partners? Why are you inviting regional countries? The North Atlantic is way over there. Asia Pacific is way over here. NATO, you have no jurisdiction. You probably shouldn't exist anyway. You have no jurisdiction over anything. Your purpose basically became irrelevant when the Soviet Union fell, but you definitely don't have any place in Asia. So not only were these countries invited, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, just like the last summit last year, but you also had a statement, a joint communique that made China be out to be a threat. And you also had the floating of a possible liaison office opening in Tokyo. And all of this angered China, and rightfully so. And here's what China had to say. This is from Al Jazeera. So China had this to say. China promises a resolute response to any NATO expansion in Asia. And Beijing rejects NATO concern over its stated ambitions, criticizes presence of Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea at the summit. So in a strongly worded statement issued halfway through their two-day summit in Lithuania, NATO leaders said that the People's Republic of China challenged the alliance's interests, security, and values with its stated ambitions and coercive policies. So here you go again. The PRC employs a broad range of political, economic, military tools to increase its global footprint and project power while remaining opaque about its strategy, intentions, and military buildup. The PRC's malicious hybrid and cyber operations and its confrontational rhetoric and disinformation target allies and harm alliance security. So this is like a copy and paste of last year's joint communique, by the way. This is exactly what they said last year. So not much has changed, really. But this was also a big addition where they talked about Russia and China's partnership being a threat. The leaders urged China to play a constructive role as one of 5 permanent veto-holding members of the UN Security Council and condemned Russia's war of aggression of Ukraine. So The Chinese mission to the European Union condemned these comments and said they firmly rejected and opposed this. So you had these 4 countries invited. You also had a liaison office floated, but it did not make it out of the summit because European countries essentially said we can't have all of that. We can't take that. That's going to anger China to a degree that we just can't afford. So that was scrapped for at least the time being. No NATO liaison office in Tokyo. However, China was still very much giving stern warnings to Europe because many things had happened even before this. And I'm just going to show you the Global Times. Really good to read the Global Times if you want to know what China's government is thinking about these things. They put out really quick statements, oftentimes directly related from the government. And here you have a warning that China warns NATO against destabilizing the Asia Pacific, and talking about how Chinese analysts are saying that the joint communique released by NATO basically shows a greater level of hostility toward China. These analysts and Chinese leadership slammed the message, warning that China needs to be prepared for an increased NATO presence in Asia, and said the internal divergences among U.S.-led alliance will only increase if it continues its unwise expansion to the rest of the world, while existing security problems in Europe were already severe. China firmly opposes NATO's eastward expansion in the Asia-Pacific region, and its characterization of China as a systemic challenge. The NATO communique this year claimed that China's ambitions and coercive policies challenge interest, security, and values. So China is warning. China is saying, do not do this, right? That it's a product of a Cold War. And the Chinese mission says that it will firmly safeguard Chinese sovereignty, security, and development interests, and firmly opposes NATO's eastward movement to the Asia Pacific. In response to the NATO Summit declaration that accuses the Russia-China relationship of undercutting the rules-based international order, Chinese Foreign Ministry said on Wednesday that China-Russia relations are based on principles of non-alignment, non-confrontation, and non-targeting of third countries. Wang Wenbin, who is a spokesperson of the Ministry of Affairs of China, said, "We urge NATO to stop groundless accusations, provocative remarks against China, and that it should give up the wrong approach of seeking absolute security, stop messing up Europe, and stop trying to destabilize the Asia Pacific and the world." Amen. So now this comes, right? So China is ready for all of this. And believe me, I know when I was there, there are discussions about this. There are preparations for war. Xi Jinping says it many times. Every time he's talking about security, every time he visits the People's Liberation Army, especially off Fujian province, especially when it is in relation to Taiwan. China is ready. China is ready for this, okay? And so here's the thing. While I was in China, leading up to the NATO summit, a lot was already happening between Europe, especially European NATO countries, and China in the economic realm. So really, a lot was being laid before the NATO summit, which is just as important, because all of this stated, oh, China's a threat, China's this, that was to be expected given last year's joint communique. It was very similar. Adding the Russia-China partnership into there, as well as reaffirming that China's a threat to security interests, values of the collective West, all of this is kind of par for the course. But I think what is really interesting about this moment is that European countries are walking a very, how should I say, dangerous tightrope with China. Because, as you all know, Europe has already destroyed itself economically in many ways through its sanctions on Russia. Now they seem to be doing the same with China. So in the lead up to this summit in July, in the first few weeks of July, you had Europe release this economic security and trade document, this economic security and trade document, basically saying that China was both a partner, competitor, and a systemic rival, and that it was going to de-risk and diversify as needed to build a stable supply chain not threatened by economic intimidation. So the EU, which, mind you, the EU and NATO, you can't separate the two. NATO is the military projection of U.S. dominance via mainly European countries. The European countries are really the most important ones in NATO. Okay, don't come at me for not saying Turkey is important because it's big military and it's non-aligned stance and it's how it plays all sides. Yes, I know Turkey's important, but let's be honest, who really calls the shots here? There's a reason why Turkey's not in the EU, even though it got assurances supposedly that it will. It's not going to happen, but that's why I didn't even mention it earlier, because I don't believe it's even worth mentioning. But nonetheless, you have the European Union is concerned about growing tensions in the Taiwan Strait, they said in the document, and opposes unilateral attempts of force. So crossing China's red line there. So essentially saying in this document that they're going to ease economic ties with China, similar to how the U.S. has been building up an economic war. What do you think this did for China? Do you think that this made China happy? Do you think it gave China hope that after all of those visits from Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron, and you had so many visits of European business people and all of this saying, oh, no, we don't want to decouple. You had all of that happen, throughout the spring. And then what happened? This happened. So this document angered China so much that they canceled Jungle Josep Borrell's potential visit. And here is that headline. So this happened in early June. Borrell was due to arrive on Monday, that was around the July 4th holiday, to meet Qin Gang, Chinese foreign minister, and the European Union was told that the planned timing of the visit no longer is possible. So China canceled the visit, and that they were informed by the Chinese counterparts that the envisaged dates are no longer possible and that we must now look for alternatives. And no alternatives have yet to be announced. So you have essentially Europe angering China to a degree that it was willing to cancel a pretty high-level meeting with Josep Borrell. And after this document. Okay, and that's not all, though. That's not all. Because this document was an indication to China that the tech war, the economic war led by the US was also going to include Europe to an even greater degree now. And so China took pretty big measures here. Here you have the EU desperate because China basically started to put in export controls of precious metals needed for the tech industry and solar panels, electric vehicles, etc., for their export. So China basically said, well, we have these metals, we will produce them for ourselves, and we can withhold them if we want to. That is our sovereign right, especially if you're going to engage in economic war against us at the behest of your U.S. master. And so the EU is now trying to beg, this was about a week ago, but is trying to beg China to release them, to ease them up. But why would China do that? Why would China do that? So basically there's these two key metals, right, that they restricted, gallium and germanium, that they essentially restricted for export in response really to the US's export ban. But a lot of European countries have essentially listened to this export ban. And now with this EU security and trade agreement, it's an indication that they're going to step up aligning their policy with the United States. And so, when I was in China, and I'll just say this about my China trip, and for everyone who's watching this on the replay or the clip video, be sure to catch in more detail information and the report back on this trip. But when I was on this trip, I was told by my Chinese counterparts that it has made a big difference. And while now Huawei is just getting out, the huge corporation that makes and produces a lot of the 5G technology and the high-tech industry in China through telecommunications, this corporation is now getting out of it, and there has been a lot of internal investment that has helped bring China's tech industry back to more normal levels, but it's still behind because of these export controls and these sanctions. And so the export controls against China has basically mobilized the world in an attempt to cut off China from needed materials and parts to produce semiconductor chips, especially the advanced kind. And what that has done is you'll have a situation, and I was told this by my Chinese counterparts, that Huawei's Mate phones, right, the latest, I think it's Mate 15, didn't have 5G technology in it because of the export ban. And so essentially people weren't buying it. They had to stay with their 14s. And I think now that is something that's going to be a thing of the past very soon. But this has been months and months and months since October 7th of 2022, where this has been a reality for Huawei. So these sanctions, these export controls have had an effect. And China lashed back, as you would expect them to. But yeah, here's the consequences. And I'll close here on this subject. This is what happens, okay? And maybe we should consider part of this a good thing, because it's been a good thing for Russia. It'll be a good thing for China as well in the long term, the short-term consequences notwithstanding. But now Huawei is poised to overcome the U.S. ban, which includes European countries following it and Asian countries as well, with return of 5G phones. So China's Huawei technology is plotting a return of the 5G smartphone industry by the end of this year, according to research firms, signaling a comeback after a U.S. ban on equipment sales decimated its consumer electronics business. Huawei should be able to produce or procure 5G chips domestically using its own advances in semiconductor design tools, along with the chip making from SMIC, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, 3 third-party technology research firms covering China's smartphone sector. The firms, citing industry sources including Huawei suppliers, spoke on condition of anonymity because of a confidentiality agreement with clients. Huawei declined to comment. SMIC did not respond to a request for comment. A return to the 5G phone market would mark a victory for the company that for almost 3 years said it was in survival mode. Huawei's consumer business revenue peaked at $483 billion in 2020 before plummeting by 50% a year later. That was due to sanctions, and it only became worse from there. So Huawei was stuck selling 4G headsets during the export control ban, and it fell from its worldwide rankings during that time, but now is back on the rise. So I just wanted to cover that in full. That is the NATO summit. That is its impact on China in particular. China was not happy about this. And why should China be happy about this? This was a disaster for China. It was a disaster for the world. And now we are going to see what happens next. In my opinion, this does indicate that China is a target of NATO. And politically, it makes a lot of sense as to why. If NATO is the military arm, a projected military arm, a global military arm of U.S. hegemony, then U.S. hegemony, seeing China as the principal threat to its very existence, of course is going to use all of the means at its disposal to try to depose of this threat. So when we talk about China, quote unquote, threat, we should not talk about China being a threat in the literal sense, that somehow China is nefarious and trying to work around the United States, trying to dominate the United States, trying to undermine the West, all of this. No, China wants cooperation. China has been very consistent in its policy of, if you respect our sovereignty, we will cooperate with you to the fullest extent. And even if you don't, we will cooperate with you in the interest of stability and economic well-being and interests. We will do so anyway. But there are red lines, Taiwan, as well as the sanctions. All of these things are red lines for China, and China will respond. So that is the political situation that is an outgrowth of these policies in the geopolitical realm. The politics of the situation are that NATO is setting its sight on China to an even further degree because it is well aware that it has not succeeded against Russia. And that if it's going to fight this two-front war, it is going to have to kind of jump back and forth between the two in order to have any kind of impact or effect. And of course, there are impacts And there are effects, as the Huawei situation shows pretty remarkably. However, the consequences of this are going to be that China's not going to collapse. It's not going to fall. It's not going to even necessarily weaken. Even in periods like this one, which is an economic slowdown for China, it is a slower economic period for China for a lot of reasons, but namely because the whole world situation is in economic distress. But even so, this is a moment also of consolidation, of self-reliance, and of China's ability, which I think is even greater than Russia's, to depend and rely upon the entire world outside and excluding the US and Europe in order to meet its own domestic imperatives as well as its many, many, many international and foreign policy imperatives, which all point to a respect for sovereignty, peace, international law, and the like. So that is only going to grow. That is only going to strengthen. That is only going to get better for China. Even as times are hard, both things can exist at the same time. So that's the political situation we need to be aware of. When we're looking at this NATO summit, we have to be aware of that the targets of NATO are only going to get stronger. And that is a good thing. However, the caution, the danger lies in the fact that every time these countries get stronger, NATO becomes more aggressive. That's where the danger lies. And that's why we have to be on the lookout after this summit, not necessarily in these words or in the drama or even in the futility and weakness of NATO itself, but in the fact that the more weak it gets, the more hampered it becomes, the more dangerous it will become, the more likely it will do something that maybe we would not imagine it doing given the rhetoric that it is stating right now. Even as hostile and aggressive as it is, we should be thinking that it is possible for a greater war to happen because of essentially NATO's position leading it, basically backing itself into a corner, leading itself into a corner. All right, everybody. So that is the coverage of the NATO summit. It was a lot. Hopefully I can split that up into 2 videos. But with that said, be sure to like the stream, everyone. We're going to get to Brics, and then we're going to get to the China trip as soon as able. All right. It might be a little bit of a late one today, but we got to get into this Brics story, and then we will talk about the China trip. All right. So like the stream, get more people in here. We got 1,100 beautiful people in here right now. Okay. That is great. And be sure to hit that like button. I think we still have less than 600 likes. So definitely bring more likes here. It helps get more people into the stream. And of course, everybody, one thing, while I was gone, a lot of people had to depart from Patreon. A lot of people had to depart from membership in this community. So please do consider supporting this work, because I am making upgrades to equipment, and I am trying to achieve sustainability so that this work can continue on a more full-time basis. I can spend more time on this, and I can essentially help better meet my needs, given that this is completely independent, completely funded, backed, produced, everything by me. And I do have some help in some realms of editing and thumbnails, and I like to be someone who gives at least as much as I can to them as they help me on this journey. So all of this, it takes labor, it takes money. So please do, if you can, support at patreon.com/Dhaiphong. You can also find Substack and one-time options and the links in the description. And of course, you can become a member of this YouTube community, which is a beautiful thing. All right, everybody, let's get into the Brics story so we can get to the China trip. All right, because I definitely want to get into the China trip. So I'm excited about Brics' upcoming summit. We've already had a lot of developments surrounding the Brics bloc. You've had interest by over 40 countries, including Bangladesh, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Argentina. You have countries all across Latin America, Asia, Africa, that are interested in joining BRICS, which currently is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And while you had some maybe setbacks, because not only was Turkey kind of double dealing during this NATO summit, but also you had Modi visit the White House. You've had Modi of India kind of hint that perhaps they're not so interested in an independent currency leveled by BRICS, facilitated by BRICS. So you had those developments which weren't necessarily promising. However, even so, the momentum I don't think has changed. I think the momentum is still in BRICS' favor, because not only do you have all of these countries ready to join in the lead up to the August summit in, I believe it's Pretoria, South Africa, or is it Johannesburg? I feel like I've heard so many places, but it's going to happen in South Africa in early August. And not only do you have so many countries looking to join, meaning that BRICS has to figure out how to make BRICS Plus a reality, but you also have talks, real talks, of an independent currency to the US dollar, an alternative currency that BRICS members can use. Now, BRICS already has many mechanisms for independent financial investment and cooperation. It has a new development bank headed by now by Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil, that the US helped stage a coup against. Dilma Rousseff is now based in Shanghai, where I was, and at the new development bank. And she is helping the new development bank do what it does, which is to provide, certain kinds of loans, as well as figure out how these BRICS countries can pool their resources together for fairer and better business opportunities and more democratic business opportunities among BRICS countries, and of course the BRICS countries, BRICS Plus countries that want to join the alliance. So it already has that mechanism and many other mechanisms in between to help and give financial assistance, mainly to global South countries. Now, this new alternative currency that's been talked about, it is very much in the planning phase. There hasn't been a lot of detail coming out about it, but there was an announcement, and I believe it was the Russian embassy in Kenya. I believe the envoy there said pretty clearly that there is going to be a rollout of a currency led by the BRICS countries, which will be backed by gold. And so I want to play you the report on this because I think it's important. The report was given by RT. Not many people have covered this, mind you. And then I'm going to give you a report from the Duran, which gave some analysis of the situation. So first, RT, let's give this a listen. Okay, the Russian embassy in Kenya was who made the announcement. And mind you, the Russian embassy in Kenya, this is not unimportant because it wasn't just a few weeks ago that Kenya said that it is very much interested in de-dollarization as well. So you have global South countries more and more becoming vocal about this. And it's important, not because the dollar is going to be dropped tomorrow or maybe next year or maybe in the next few years, but this is important to asserting sovereignty. So let's listen here.
The BRICS group is set to introduce a new currency backed by gold, in contrast to the credit-backed US dollar, with countries lining up to join the growing initiative.
The BRICS countries are planning to introduce a new trading currency which will be backed by gold. More and more countries recently expressed desire to join BRICS.
The decision comes a month ahead of scheduled Alliance Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. 41 countries have since shown their interest in BRICS membership and its new currency implementation. Russia's foreign ministry has stated that if African states show enthusiasm, the group's expansion may also be on a Russia-Africa Summit's agenda in the end of July. As of now, the BRICS group remains comprised of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. Former statistician general of South Africa, Pali Lehola, says the gold-backed currency will facilitate the advancement of developing countries.
Avoiding using the gold standard, we have gone for almost 45 years now since 1980 when this was dropped. And we have seen the consequences, particularly of this to the developing countries when the dollar was adopted as a standard and gold not as such. Yet against that, there's been accumulation of gold in the developing world. South Africa had a much stronger currency when the gold standard was still in force. By going the gold standard by many countries, that many African countries, of course, have, this will be of great benefit to strengthening the currency, the single currency that is backed by gold. It will facilitate development because, after all, currency is the quantity of material things that societies have. If you use another currency based on material wealth or material things you don't have, it means that you are at the mercy of that country, and it's and they will charge commissions and the like.
Sorry, I was muted. These are very good points, okay? And before I continue, I'm actually going to reload for 1 second because I'm noticing that there is kind of a freezing in the video, and I'm hoping that wasn't happening this whole time. But I'm going to reload quickly, okay? And please do not go anywhere. I'm going to put the Be Right Back card, and hopefully we'll be back with you in about a very short period of time. All right, I'm just going to reload in a second. All right, everybody, I'm back. Sorry about that. I hope that fixes any issue there. I did notice that there was some kind of freezing happening. I'm hoping that wasn't happening earlier in the video, but everyone stick around, okay? I'm still here. I am back. All right, so I hope that didn't affect the whole video, but nonetheless, we'll see what happens, okay? Stick around, everybody. So back to Brics, okay? So those are all good points. Basically, Brics is thinking about a gold-backed currency, and there are advantages to that. I don't think, there's a lot of economists who argue, well, a fiat currency, you can be more flexible and all of this. However, a fiat currency is always going to benefit the hegemonists, especially the collective West. And that was the big thing about the post-World War II order. Getting rid of gold in its entirety, getting rid of a commodity-backed currency was really about hegemony for the West, because these are countries that didn't have these resources in large quantities. And also, they didn't have an interest in using these resources in a way that was fair to the vast majority. So when you have a system like that, you're going to want to have the broadest range of financial flexibility, i.e., meaning laissez-faire economics, i.e., meaning that bankers, Wall Street types, they can do whatever they want. And that was what the dollar was really all about. You peg it to petroleum, to the Saudi petro-dollar arrangement, and essentially what you have is a weapon against the global South, where the U.S. has virtual monopoly over how all trade is conducted by becoming the basically the global reserve currency. That is what the dollar has been all about. But this gold-backed currency would essentially undermine this, undercut this arrangement by allowing BRICS countries and, of course, the rest of the global South to figure out arrangements using commodities. And I don't buy the fact that it will only be gold-backed. I believe that having a gold-backed is just a stepping stone for allowing a more stable kind of economic arrangement where countries can trade with their respective currencies in a manner that is fair to them, rather than what happens now, which is the U.S. uses its military, political, and economic hegemony to threaten other countries with the weaponization of the dollar and says, we will hold you hostage to debt, to credit, as well as to sanctions if you do not do what we say. They've done this to Saudi Arabia how many times in the last year alone, saying, listen to us. You need to be the one who increases oil production, decreases oil production. That will lower prices, and that will help bring essentially stability to the so-called market, the world market, basically for the United States, but not to anybody else, because it always has externalities and problems for countries in the global south, right? Whether it's trying to undermine Venezuela through pumping more oil into the market and decreasing the price so Venezuela starves even further from sanctions, or whether it's trying to manipulate the oil market through Saudi Arabia doing the same for Russia, so sanctions against Russia work, or whether it's just leveling sanctions after sanctions after sanctions so that all countries that are sanctioned that need to trade in dollars simply cannot. Their SWIFT system is dismantled and they essentially become more impoverished than before. That's the point of the dollar at this moment. And so this gold-backed currency is important. So that's why it's important to even just talk about this, because some people might want to delegitimize its potential impact, given that it might be a ways away. You have some disagreement. You've even had South Africa talk about, well, we have a lot of debts in dollars and we're not going to be able to just transition to a new currency, a new international currency right away. India has been speaking about some of its suspicions and perhaps maybe its other ambitions that might run contrary to this. But nonetheless, it's still going to be significant, given that the two biggest countries spearheading de-dollarization, Russia and China, are going to be all in on this in many respects, at least in a manner that continues to work out this global balance economically. So I want to just show you what the Duran folks had to say. They are friends of the show, and they analyzed this situation, their thoughts about how big this might be for Brics. And so let's play a few minutes here and talk about it.
And we have a new currency on the way from Brics. So I think this is a pretty big story.
This is a huge story because it changes absolutely everything. Because, of course, when the Brics currency is up and running, Russia's trade is going to be conducted in it. And what we're probably going to be heading towards is a system like the original Bretton Woods system, in which all the currencies all the countries that are trading with each other use this currency as their trading mechanism. Their own currencies will probably be fixed in some way to this currency, but unlike the euro system, capable always of upward or downward adjustment, depending on whether they're running trade surpluses or trade deficits. And that will change the entire system, the entire game plan. And what we hear is that this is going to be discussed at the Brics Summit in South Africa in September. And we're probably not going to see it immediately, but it is coming now very fast. You said at the start of the program that Putin has disclosed that most of the trade, 80% of the trade between China and Russia, is being conducted now in RMB, in Chinese currency, and in rubles. Russia's trade with India is also being conducted increasingly in rupees and rubles. Argentina has just repaid some of its debt to the International Monetary Fund in RMB, in Chinese currency. Interestingly, the International Monetary Fund accepted that payment. So we are probably within a year, 2 years of seeing this new currency system up and running.
Do you know
where the whole world will be?
Do you know anything about? Do you know anything about this currency, or is it a currency, a basket?
So before you get into that, I mean, that's all good context. And I think this context is really important before we get further into what it is, because I don't think we know much about what exactly it's going to look like yet. However, I think what's most important is that there is a political impetus to this, mainly that the biggest economies in the world, mind you, Brics countries, bigger than the G7 in total GDP, and China quickly surpassing the US in nominal GDP terms, already passed in purchasing power parity terms. Russia, a rising economy, I think the 11th biggest in the world. And given the state of the rest of the world, it is actually growing to a degree that at least is respectable and will keep its position likely for some time to come. And these two countries are trading more and more. I think 80% of trade, he said, in their respective currencies. And this is becoming increasingly so the same with India and Russia. And these are the big countries. And so that's the trend. And it's not that it's necessarily, I think some people overstate that this is somehow going to obliterate the collective West immediately. No, their economic dominance is going to remain for some time, so long as they have the military, the political, as well as the economic influence that they do. But the point is that these are the mechanisms of sovereignty. These countries are on the rise. And the more that they're able to develop these mechanisms of economic sovereignty, the more that both their domestic and global aims become easier to achieve. And that is a snowball effect, right? Because politics isn't about bang, 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 right? These this isn't the big bang, this isn't like a snap of the fingers and something massive happens. What usually happens in history is that you have these contradictions that build up and build up. One thing begets the next, that turns into the next. You have this kind of quantitative change happen that eventually leads to qualitative change. And I believe that Brics making these moves, that these Brics countries making these moves both bilaterally and multilaterally, is leading to what I think is going to be a seismic change in the global economy in favor of the global South. It's already happening, and I believe it's going to only strengthen. That's really what de-dollarization is all about. It's not about the technicalities of the currency, because of course, in such a complex, intertwined, interconnected world economy with many different systems involved, but the dominant one being finance capitalism, you're going to have a long way to go before that just falls apart. And again, as I said, I don't think it's something of a massive change, snap of the finger that happens right away. It's about these quantitative changes, however small they are, eventually leading to pretty massive qualitative changes. But let's continue.
Of currencies, what do we know so far? What's the context to this story? Because not much has been revealed. At least I haven't seen a lot of talk about the actual mechanics and the structure of this.
It's all very private and very quiet. But the talk now is it's going to be an actual currency, and it's going to be backed by gold. Which, by the way, if you go back to the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, that was what J.M. Keynes actually originally wanted. He did not want the dollar to be the reserve currency. He wanted the Bancor, as it was called, an artificial currency backed by gold, to be the reserve currency in which international trade was conducted.
I wonder if this is one of the reasons that Yellen is going to China.
Well, of course it is. That's exactly why she's going to China. The reason there is pressure on the administration, the Biden administration, to reverse course with China, why there are people in Washington who want to reopen dialogue with the Chinese, is because they're getting very, very worried indeed about these developments. And they want to see what the Chinese are up to and establish some kind of dialogue with them and see whether they can persuade the Chinese to change their minds about it. So that's why Blinken went to China. This is why there was talk about a summit meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping. And of course, it's also why Yellen herself is going to China. The problem is the Chinese have now made it very clear that they don't trust Biden. They don't trust the United States. And given that they're putting so much work into setting up this alternative reserve currency, I can't really see why they would put all that work aside now and re-engage with the Americans and return to trading with the dollar.
Yeah, I think the Chinese learned their lesson with the whole Blinken affair, and then within 24 hours, Xi Jinping was a dictator. I think the Chinese said, "Okay, that's it. We can't deal with these people." And they even told Borrell, who was scheduled to visit China, they told him, "Don't even bother coming."
So, that's all I'll play it for that, because I think the big point here, and yes, Janet Yellen did visit China when I was in China, did visit China, and the outcome was not very good either, right? There was, I think, a little bit warmer of a feeling, and there has been hints that maybe Janet Yellen will ease up on the economic trade war, the tariffs. Nothing concrete. And also, you had, leading up to it, all sorts of double dealing that I've already discussed, from the United States meeting with India, trying to peel India away from Brics. You also had Turkey, right? Turkey, another country that seeks Brics membership, get closer to the collective West. And that's because the United States has been trying to work these countries into submission, peel them away from the Brics bloc, and really from Russia and China. But the point here is, and I think this is the biggest takeaway, because you also had Iran join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as the Brics Summit approaches. I think the big point to all of this is that what we have to recognize is these mechanisms for sovereignty are not about just destroying the dollar and making it so the US dollar doesn't exist anymore. It's about everything that the US dollar represents, because remind you, the US dollar isn't backed by anything. We have to remember that. It isn't backed by anything. And that's because that gives finance, big finance, the most flexibility to do what the global South has been ravaged by for so many decades, which is to leverage credit, leverage debt, to essentially destabilize and destroy entire economies, entire nations through economic means, using sanctions to starve people, to destabilize supply chains, and to impose an economic hegemony of a kind. That is what the dollar represents. And of course, it's heavily tied to the energy industry. So still, it's tied to a commodity to a significant degree. And that's because if you think about geopolitics and you think about this Brics versus G7, Brics versus NATO, Brics versus US-led hegemony, what you're really talking about is a war over sovereignty of resources, sovereignty of the means of production at the most basic form in the commodity and raw material. That is what we're talking about. We get to the foundation of all currency in its raw materials. How are you trading? What are you trading? How is that conducted? And so that's why the US talks about the rules-based international order, quote unquote. And that's why the US is so desperate to peel away India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, anyone it can from Russia, China, and its growing multipolar world. It's doing so because if Russia and China are able to lead the global South into an alternative economic arrangement, principally through the formation of a new currency, which can help kind of develop the economic foundations of the global South, then that will cut the United States out of its core, its core thread of domination, which is stealing, looting, and plundering from the global South. The United States cannot operate on military power alone. Neither can Europe. Never in history has the US or the collective West and all of its imperial machinations and forms been able to do that, and nothing is different today. In fact, it can be argued that while the United States tries to rely on military dominance now more than ever, that is a signal of economic decline and weakness, and it hasn't actually produced the results that it has hoped for. What have we seen? No matter Syria, Libya, Ukraine, you name it, the global south has only become more and more emboldened to join alternative frameworks, from Brics to the SCO to the Belt and Road Initiative to the Eurasian Economic Union. We can go on and on and on. So that is really the struggle here. The currency is really just the facilitator of this. And so that's why it's going to be so significant should Brics be able to come up with the framework for this, and even just begin the process. Even just beginning the process is going to destabilize the US-led hegemonic political, economic, and military order. It will. You will see backlash. Believe it. So that is the importance of all of this. And that's why we have to keep track of this. I will be doing a lot of coverage in August of that summit, and hopefully have some good guests to talk about it as well, as good as it gets. So everyone stay tuned. But that's really where we're at right now. This gold-backed currency is going to be rolled out in some form, or at least there's going to be discussions about it. And we will see what the Brics bloc comes up with. But already you see the U.S., right, with the Janet Yellen visit. It didn't achieve very much to China, but they tried. And so this is really where we're at. This is the stage of the geopolitical conflict that's unfolded, and we've got to continue to pay attention and to really assert the rightful place of these countries, which is the respect that they deserve under the framework of international law, that their self-determination should be respected, and that we should all support these efforts to build a more peaceful and stable economic order that essentially will have to exclude the U.S. and the collective West unless they change their political and economic behavior. But of course, that's up to us, not them. So with that said, everyone, that's the end of the formal stories. Wow, we've already gotten up to an hour and 40 minutes. Well, I guess I've been on for more like an hour and a half. The camera is doing this freezing thing. I couldn't stop it with reload. It must be the camera. Something's going on. Hopefully get that figured out. Again, I'm in a tech drive right now, everybody. So this stream, I'm just going to have to deal with that. I hope it's not too disruptive. Give me a like if you haven't liked the stream yet. Hit that notifications bell. Of course, subscribe to the channel first. And of course, you know, to help out this tech drive, to help out with the growing needs of the channel, do subscribe on Patreon. There's annual memberships, patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. Link in the description. Substack is also a great option. Paid membership, annual options available. You can also become a YouTube member, $5 per month. In all these options, you get a lot of perks. You can ask questions for guests, ask me questions, suggest content. People know that I do. People who do subscribe can attest that I do carry forward those questions. And there's going to be more things rolled out in the near future as I readjust to civilian life from China. And believe me, I am very jet lagged. But let's get to this. All right, this is the fun part. Well, I hope that the geopolitical analysis was fun in some way. But this is the fun part for me, at least. I hope it's fun for you. Let's get to inside China. So some of you may know that I went to China. It was a very impromptu visit. I'll try to tell this in story form, and I'm going to show some pictures as well. I don't have a lot. I have some videos, but you know, to be honest, the videos that I took of events, it was just a lot of work I couldn't get done to send to myself and then play them and download them. And there's all sorts of email, I have to WeTransfer them, and it's a whole thing. So nonetheless, I have pictures, and I'm going to tell the stories of the trip, and then I have a bunch of interviews that I did over the course of the trip that if you haven't checked out yet, you should, because they do tell the tale of kind of how the trip went for me. I interviewed a Chinese American woman who lives in Beijing now, actually from the United States, now lives in Beijing. And she's a student. And I interviewed her in Beijing about her experience living there and about her perceptions and views on China. I also interviewed who is a friend of mine now and who I enjoyed his company very much on this trip, Sergei Sanakoyev, who is the vice chair of the Russia-China Friendship Association. He was a wonderful person to attend a delegation with, and we had a good interview on actually the high-speed rail to the airport to Lanzhou to Dhaiphong, two cities in western China, Gansu province. And so we did a short interview there. And then Andy Borum of Reports on China, you may know him. We did a conversation walking around Shanghai. And so while I hoped that I was going to meet Alex from Reportify Media, that was unable to happen. But nonetheless, I was able to meet several people in addition to this outside of the formal interviews. But you can check those out for additional content. Plus, I did a walkthrough of Lanzhou. My one night there, I did a walkthrough, 40 minutes walking around the city. You can catch that also in the videos of the last week and a half or so. So with that said, that's one part of the trip, but I'll just tell you the basis for the trip first. I was invited by the Chinese Association for International Understanding, a Chinese NGO. This NGO does fall under the auspices of, drumroll, the International Department of the Communist Party of China. So I know what you're thinking. Ooh, I'm an agent of the Communist Party now. But in reality, the Communist Party of China is the ruling party in China. And I believe actually it's a very good thing that NGOs don't have this independent kind of private foundation character to them in China where they can just do whatever they want. This association is independent of the government in many respects, but it is staffed and employed by government employees. It's a government institution in many ways. And it's dedicated to building a further cooperation and really mutual exchanges among peoples of different nations. And because of COVID-19 and all of those restrictions, it hasn't really been able to do that work for quite a while. So they're looking to get back into it, and they hosted a dialogue. It was a huge conference, mind you, a huge conference, a dialogue on exchanges and mutual learning among civilizations as part of the rollout of the Global Civilization Initiative of Chinese President Xi Jinping. And so the trip started in Beijing. I was there for about 3.5 days, I believe it was. 2 of those days, unfortunately, were busy days at the dialogue, which included the opening ceremony, which had leaders from mainly Asia, Africa, Latin America, talk about their impressions of the Global Civilization Initiative, what it meant to come together, to talk about diversity of civilizations, respecting the right of different civilizations and nations to self-determination, and essentially talking about more so the political and diplomatic realm, less so the economic realm, although there was a lot of attention on how everyone is going to modernize while respecting their specificity and their specific cultural contexts. So that was the basis for the dialogue. Lots of presentations on the first day. The keynote was actually the vice president of China, and he gave the keynote speech, and there are many other leaders as well that attended. And so I attended a delegation. I was the only American who came from the United States, and I was with pretty big, like, I mean, people that I wouldn't normally be hanging around with, right? The Ali Al-Hafni, the former Egyptian ambassador to China. I was with Fernando Jacamino, the current vice minister of culture to Cuba. and many, many, many others. I told you about Sergei Sanakoyev as well. And so it was a great trip. We attended 4 cities in 10 days. It was a lot of travel. We first started in Beijing for the dialogue. I moderated a panel at the conference portion of the dialogue. And then I did hang out in Beijing. I did get to meet Li Jingjing. I did get to meet some other friends out there. But we were off to Lanzhou, which is a city in Gansu. It's the capital of Gansu province in western China, very close to Xinjiang region, actually. I'd been to Dunhuang, which we went to after. But we went to Lanzhou for a day, and then we traveled to Dunhuang for a few days, and then we ended in Shanghai. The rest of the delegation was a mixture of official kind of meetings. We met with the Dunhuang Academy. We met actually with the head of publicity of the province in Dunhuang. And in Shanghai, I actually met Yang Jieshi. I don't know if you remember him. He was the former top diplomat under Xi Jinping before Wang Yi was promoted. And you might remember Anchorage, Alaska, and that disaster between him and Blinken. I met his brother, Yang Jiemian, who is the head of the Shanghai Institute for International Studies. He is the chair, and he gave a presentation on the last day in Shanghai. And so that's what I did. I mean, that's the combination. Then a lot of tourism, right? I got to go and see the Pearl Tower over in Shanghai. I got to go. Well, I went by myself, but I split off from the group and got to see the founding place of the Communist Party of China in Shanghai, in Dunhuang, the Maga Grotto caves, the huge Buddhist temple caves, also the Minsha Mountains, which is a huge desert, in Dunhuang, in Lanzhou, a lot of cool things, good food, lots of Hui Muslims there. And then in Beijing, I got to meet a few people and spend some time in the city. But now I'm going to show you some photos, and let's see if I can do this. That was basically the trip. I also got to go. I went to a club in Shanghai with a friend, Dana Burton. Some of you may know him as Iron Mike. He's a Black American from Detroit who lives in Shanghai. He's been on the show before to talk about his experience as a Black person in China, and he met up with me. And we went to a club. I met his friends. I actually met the former assistant to Alibaba, Alibaba's Jack Ma, which was really interesting. Really nice guy. He actually went to school in the United States and I believe spent a lot of time in the U.S., if not was raised here. And he talked about his independent project that he's doing to try to bring youth culture through media to the Western world, youth Chinese culture to the Western world, and show people the real China. And so I got to meet some really interesting people. Nonetheless, I'm going to show you some photos, okay? I'm going to show you some photos of what I saw exactly. And I'm going to explain to you a few beautiful moments that I experienced in China. And mind you, there's a lot of fireworks going off right now, and my dog is struggling so hard, and I feel really bad for him. So if you see me looking a bit, that's what's happening. It's really unfortunate, actually really annoying. So anyway, this is the fun part of the thing. So let me see if I can get these up. I think I'm going to share my Google Drive here with the folder. I'm just going to go through them. They may not be in the correct order. I didn't have much time to organize them, but hopefully they just pop up when I look at them. Okay. So let's see. And then I'll tell you a few stories of my trip if I can toggle my memory. So let's see. This is the first one. Yes. So here you have, can you see that? Yes, it comes up. All right. So there you have me with a few friends. Okay. We have Ellie here, a very interesting person who follows my work, supports my work. She's in the shipping business. She's lived so many different places, Russia, Taiwan, Beijing. She's lived everywhere. She has family in many different places. Very interesting person, and also very smart, intelligent, and really good conversation. Here you have, of course, Li Jingjing. You see her. We all got hot pot together. And then you have here another gentleman, Nick, who also follows my work, a really good person, and really great to meet people who support me. So, hey, if I end up traveling, you support my work, you contact me. I love meeting up and having conversation. And we had a great time having hot pot. We tried to go to this really big hot pot spot, and we were going to be waiting for 2 hours. So we went to a smaller one, and we had some fun there. So did that in Beijing. And here's me in Li Jingjing again. This is at the Dialogue. She did some media coverage of the Dialogue, and I was there in this 95-degree heat in a suit. I was not very happy to be sitting at the opening ceremony in 95-degree heat in a suit, but nonetheless, there I am with her. Really great to meet her for the first time in person in China. Really fun. Didn't have enough time. We'll probably have to do more of that when I am back there, but really great to meet her. She does great work. So you might all be familiar with the Forbidden City. So this is my second time there. I went the first time I was in China in 2019. And the Forbidden City is this like imperial city. The empires, the various imperial era ancient Chinese dynasties, they basically use the Forbidden City as kind of like their private, it's feudalism. It's like their private city almost. It's like their city. And they had their concubines in there, and they did their thing. But the most, I think, interesting part of the Forbidden City, and mind you, this wasn't my favorite part of the trip, but I wanted to show you this because this is a cauldron used by especially the Qing dynasty, the last dynasty of China. They use this to put out fires. And now you might remember that the Century of Humiliation occurred during the beginning with the Opium Wars. So you might be able to see, let me see if I can zoom in. Now you might be able to see if I zoom in there. You see how it's scratched up? See these scratches? You might notice that and say, oh yeah, this is just an old tool, right? An old tool. So it's scratched up, wear and tear. Well, the story behind this is actually the British, the French, I think the Spanish as well. During the Opium Wars, what they did is they vandalized the Forbidden City. A lot of the Forbidden City had to be restored. But this cauldron used to put out fires was scratched up by the British, by the French, by the Spanish, and the other so-called European powers that vandalized the city when they were looting and plundering and putting China into a century of humiliation. So I just wanted to share that story to remind you that China has a history. It's not just now that China is coming under the target of Western hegemony. This has been a process for a very long time. So I just wanted to show you that. Here is a great contrast. So again, China is a socialist country, socialism with Chinese characteristics. And this was termed during the opening up and reform period to note that while China has a socialist economic base, while China has a socialist government, it has opened itself up to the world market and allowed foreign direct investment with the condition that this investment serves the development of the entire country to the benefit of the majority of people and not just those who are coming in. So these companies do not dominate the country, but they do come in, they can make their profits, and they can serve a purpose. So here you have McDonald's, right? You have Kohler, you have these foreign corporations with alongside this celebration of the 26th anniversary of the liberation of Hong Kong from the British Empire, which happened in 1997. So it was the 26th anniversary when I was there. And so you had these signs all around China. I just wanted to show that contrast to let you know what it means for these countries, for this country to be socialist with Chinese characteristics. This kind of symbolizes it to a great degree. So this is in the really a busy shopping center in Beijing. And here's another image of this. This is the 102nd anniversary of the Communist Party, which also falls on the same day of July 1st. So that was seen around. And so the conference was held in a place called the Classic Publication. Well, it's called actually the the Chinese National Archives and Publications building. And this is the classic publications and archives of Marxism, Leninism, a large section of this building. It's a new building under Xi Jinping that was built to basically gather all the publications and documents that have been written as much as can be preserved. And so it's kind of like a museum of publications, very interesting place. And this is where the dialogue was actually held. The only complaint I had about that was that it's very far north of Beijing. Like it's still Beijing, but it's like an hour and a half from what you would call the city center. Beijing is mainly urbanized, so there really there is a center, but it's not the same as like Manhattan, for example, in New York City. However, nonetheless, I was like in the mountains. That's where my hotel was. It was kind of, let's just say, a pain to get. One of the few places where there's no metro, so it was a pain to get to this place. It took like an hour by car. And then when I wanted to meet up with people like Li Jingjing, what I had to do was I had to take a cab. I had to take a cab an hour and a half. And I want to just let you know, though, that before I talk about, and so you have Lenin and Engels pictures here, Mao, you see, there I am with Lenin. And I'm going to talk about me moderating this dialogue in a second. There's my name tag. I want to talk about my cab ride experience because it immediately hit me coming back to the United States. It immediately hit me. I was in a $100 plus taxi back to my apartment. If you know anything about traveling from the airport in New York, you have to know that it is a terrible experience. It is very far away. You're either on the train for 2.5 hours. If you have any luggage at all, it's not feasible if you're traveling by yourself. And so you have to take a taxi. And taxis are incredibly expensive. It was over $100 to get about 10 to 15 miles. Now, when I was in Beijing, I traveled 40, sometimes 50 kilometers, an hour and a half, depending on the traffic. It could be more. But I was traveling like later at night, so there was no traffic. Do you know how much I paid for those cab rides? Mind you, all the Chinese and Li Jingjing and others were saying, oh, that's really expensive. It's really expensive to do that. I'm sorry that you have to do that. They shouldn't have put you so far. But do you know how much I paid? I paid about 100 RMB for an hour and a half taxi ride, about 40, 50 kilometers. That's about, I'm not an expert on kilometers to miles, but let's just say somewhere between 25 to 35 miles. So really, I was traveling nearly triple the distance, and I paid 100 RMB. Do you know? Divide that by 7, and it's nearly 15 to 17 US dollars. Less than 20 US dollars. Less than 20 US dollars to get across the city of Beijing, which is huge. I told you, 50 kilometers. And I paid a small fraction of the amount for a taxi, a nicer taxi, mind you, a nicer one. So that hits me right. I'm so like the plane ride destroyed me. I'm like delirious. And then I get the taxi and it just immediately hits me. I'm back in the United States. So here is the picture of the dialogue, okay? So this is the third dialogue in exchange and mutual learning among civilizations, and it was also called the First World Conference of Sinologists. That's where a bunch of academics, experts, and the former politicians, everyone participated in more intimate dialogues, and that's where I hosted one panel, and that was an experience because you know me, I'm professional, but I haven't had that kind of high-level experience. So to moderate with high-level academics, people from Belt and Road Research Institutes, former leaders, and all these kind of stakeholders, many of them from the global south. It was a very interesting experience, former diplomats, etc. To moderate that kind of dialogue was a challenge. I wanted to video it, but it wasn't appropriate. There was Chinese media videoing it, but I didn't have the appropriate equipment. It was just not It was not doable. And I was not trying to have the vice president of the organization moderated before me. So I really wasn't trying to make that kind of scene. But nonetheless, I had a great experience moderating it. And it was a little bit humbling, a little bit scary, I got to say. And here you have the dignitaries. You had people from Kazakhstan. You had people from Malaysia. You had people from here, a major professor in South Africa who gave the final keynote speech at my panel. Here's Ali Al-Hafni. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here. There he is. I don't know if you see that. Yes, you do. So that's the former Egyptian ambassador to Egypt. I mean, the former Egyptian ambassador to China, who was on my delegation. Sad he had to leave after Beijing because I really wanted to interview him and I had no time in Beijing. But nonetheless, you can't get them all. So there is the picture of the session that I moderated. Strange experience. Actually, this is the CCTV, China Global Television Network as well, building. They call it the pants building, the trousers building, because it looks like a pair of pants. That's where Li Jingjing works. And so we walked by it on the way. Thought I would show you what it looks like. And here is the tallest building in Beijing. It's just a commercial building, lots of offices, but it's the tallest building in Beijing. And I tell you, when you look up, you will get dizzy. Let me see if I can zoom in on a little too much. So there you have it. The tallest building in Beijing. You will get dizzy looking at it. All right. So very impressive. Now we're off to Lanzhou. And this picture was taken at the Water Wheel Park, which is just a tourist attraction to show how people in Lanzhou during the more underdeveloped periods use water wheels to generate energy so that they could do things like cook, etc. Power lights and all of that. Well, it's a beautiful place. This was very funny. Here's the core socialist values of China. And I actually do have them translated. Let me see. I don't know if I'll be able to find them. I could probably actually just look them up for you because they're all over China. So you'll see this. One thing about China is, well, you will. Oh, here we go. Yes, we have them here. So while in China, you do have corporate advertisements here and there, you do have them, especially in the busy shopping centers. It is not to the degree that you see in the Western world. You will not find in your face, provocative, hypersexualized, whatever your opinions on all of that is. But you won't find kind of like an intense culture to sell you things. That's more like in China. It kind of is more akin to the rest of Asia, where except a lot of Asia has been very much privatized and corporatized by the Western world. But in China, what you'll have more of is just Chinese businesses and markets, etc., try to sell you things like in person rather than there be like super advertisements and billboards everywhere. But you will find what some China haters may call propaganda, but really it's just reminders to people in celebrations of the leadership of the country, which is revered. And believe me, if you go to China, you will know that many Chinese, if not most Chinese people, most Chinese people adore their leadership. They really do believe their political leadership is something to talk about. So here are the core socialist values: prosperity, democracy, civility, harmony, freedom, equality, justice, rule of law, patriotism, dedication, integrity, and friendship. So that's the core socialist values. You find them everywhere. You find them in the most pretty places. And you find these banners all over the place. Okay. So I wanted to show you that. Here is the water wheel park, probably the most beautiful part of it, to my opinion. I don't find water wheels to be beautiful, so I didn't take pictures of them for you. But here's a view of the park. Very clean, very beautiful, very spacious, very green. China is very green. They've put in a lot of work. They lead the world in planting trees, in reforesting. They lead the world in that. I believe they make up 25% of new added green space. And if you go to China, even in Shanghai, all across the big cities, you see it. It's not just the big parks like in New York or in other cities. in London where I was, you'll have big parks, right? Big parks, beautiful green spaces. It does exist, but it's very concentrated. It doesn't exist in most other parts of the city. China, it's much different. China is much different. Everywhere has green space for the most part. Not everywhere, but the vast majority of the cities. And so here's just one example. Beautiful. Loved it. Here is the airport. So you get a Communist Party of China history at the airport. This is me going through security. So mind you, security was not that bad at the airports in China. It's nothing like the US. It's nothing like TSA. I got to say, security at the airports in China, much better, much easier to go through. And you know what? They're just government workers. The security in airports, they're actually nice and helpful, and people that are really out to serve more so than to bash you over the head if you do something wrong. So here you have a history of the Communist Party of China along the walls at airport security. So I found that to be very interesting, to say the least. And it just goes to show the commitment of the political leadership in China and the Chinese people in remembering their history, learning their history. Actually, on the way back from China, on my 15-hour trip from Shanghai back here to the US, I watched the movie 1921 on the plane. They had that movie. It was great. I loved it. It was a great historical depiction. It was also dramatized and fun, but it's a great movie. And it's just funny that it was on the plane. If you've flown in the collective West, most of the things that you can watch on the plane are kind of, how should I say, superficial. Not to say anything against fun. We should all be having fun. But let's be honest. We're not going to learn that much on the plane rides on Delta or any other airline in the collective West. So 1921 was a great movie to watch on the way back from Shanghai. And it's also good to see China's commitment to its history here in airport security, of all places. Now, this I really am going to talk a lot about. This was a huge and beautiful moment. We went to Dunhuang. If you don't know anything about Dunhuang, it's a major city along the old ancient Silk Road in the province called Gansu. And this province has been historically one of the poorest in China. And why is that? Well, because it's a desert, essentially. It is a desert. It's basically a traveling place. It is beautiful, historical relics, so much culture, so much to preserve. A beautiful place. I love that. This is my second time going there, and I had a much better time, I believe, the second time than the first, because I got to go to many great places, including this performance. So I'm going to tell you about this performance, okay? This performance. Now, you see these performers here in the background, right? And these performers now put on a show about the story of Gansu. And it was about kind of life during the Silk Road. It was beautiful, lots of great music. Couldn't understand a thing because it was all in Chinese, but it was beautiful and it was great to see. A really interesting point about this, it was held at the Grand Theater, just built in 2019. Beautiful, magnificent theater, really nice. But the most important thing to note here, why I wanted to show you this picture and not just a picture of the theater, which you can look it up, Grand Theater of Dunhuang. But this performance was so beautiful for many different reasons. Number one, those performers in the background, the dancers were all deaf, and the singers were all blind. So it was really an ode to the disabled community all throughout China and the talent that they have. And I just thought that was incredible because I tell you, the skill of this performance, it blew me away. But the fact that they were disabled, right? You had the dancers following sign language while they were dancing. It just blew my mind because they couldn't follow the music. So they had people on both sides giving signs. I was just blown away by all of that. But now comes another really important part of this performance and why I showed you this photo. So here you had the daughter of Dunhuang, this older woman right here. Let me highlight her. Can I do it? Is it going to let me do it? No. Okay. So right here, it wasn't letting me do it in the past, but here you have the daughter of Dhaiphong in the middle. It's her 85th birthday. Her name is Fan Jinxi. And Fan Jinxi is a woman who dedicated her entire post-college life. She's from Shanghai, from the big city. She dedicated her whole post-college life in the Communist Party of China to living in Gansu province during the most underdeveloped, poorest period of the province, to go there, to tell its story, to help the province maintain and preserve its cultural integrity and all that it had to offer in that way. So she worked for the Dhaiphong Academy. I believe she was one of the founders of it. And she essentially spent her whole life going through all of the relics, all of the various sites, and helping the party preserve them for people to see, so that they could be used as not just a tool of preserving culture, a rich culture. Dozens of ethnic groups live there, a wonderful history of the Silk Road residing there, but also to help the country, to help the province develop, because tourism now is domestic tourism is helping this province develop just so significantly. When I was there, you can see it. The tourism is bustling and people are making money while essentially just promoting their own businesses, their own culture, showing what Dhaiphong is all about. And she was given a whole celebration. You should have seen it. I wish I could play you the video. I just didn't have time to send, but I will be posting these all over. You had people, a full packed house in the theater, rushing to the front, wanting to take pictures of her, wanting to be around her, clapping and cheering. And it was like she was like a Kim Kardashian or something. It was like she was a major celebrity all across China, because everyone at this performance were tourists. They were from all over the country, and they were just so happy to see her. And I'm just going to show you. I'm going to actually stop sharing the screen and share you a quick article about who Fan Jinxi is. Okay, so she's the daughter of Dhaiphong. Or I'm not gonna play too much of it, but basically, she was the former president, honorary president of the Dhaiphong Academy. This is her right here. She is basically here, the daughter of Dhaiphong. So she was born in 1938 in Beijing, and she came from a very kind of more well-to-do family, educated family. And so she was actually named Jinxi, which means beautiful poetry. So she liked cultural relics, and she went to Peking University, where she did archaeology. And so she went to Dhaiphong for the first time in 1962. And let me just zoom out, because for some reason I can't see the whole thing. All right. So she went to Dhaiphong in 1962. And so she went with 3 classmates, and they went to the Dhaiphong Institute of Cultural Relics, now Dhaiphong Academy, to do field work. And there she stayed. She was dumbfounded. She thought it was just the conditions were so bad there, but there were so many things to preserve. And so it was a crucial year for that city, Dhaiphong. The premier at the time, Zhou Enlai, instructed the facilitation of huge amounts of money to start cliff reinforcement projects in the southern area of the Maga Grottos, which are the big Buddhist caves there. And there were no professional archaeologists in the institute at the time. They requested Peking University for professionals to guide the excavation, and Fan became one of the 2 students assigned there. So this environment is not easy to live in. Her parents worried about her. It's the desert. There's the heat. There's also the cold. When I was there in 2019, it gets so cold. I'm talking in the negative. Her father told her, since it was her own choice, she should give it her best. So her father basically encouraged her to go. And so she's considered tireless and selfless, because she basically sacrificed what could have been probably more lucrative careers in the city in order to go and help Dhaiphong shine, to preserve, to be there. And then she was appointed deputy director. She dedicated her life to the protection of these cultural relics. And thanks to Fawn and her colleagues, Dunhuang has become increasingly visible and accessible to the world. The Maga grottos have become, I mean, you have 1 million people each year visit these caves now. Huge boost to tourism. So that's who she is. That's who they celebrate over there. She devoted her time to the people, essentially, to that province, to that city. And I mean, it was a beautiful thing to see someone like that celebrated. You just don't get that here in the US. You don't have people who served celebrated in the same way. Yeah, you have Martin Luther King Day. Yeah, you have some pandering, but you do not have that kind of how should I say, adoration of ordinary people. People that just did extraordinary things for others, but who are in a sense ordinary. They're not celebrities, or they're not made into celebrities in the same way. So it was just beautiful to see, and that was just a really great moment. Not only the performance, but also that celebration. Here's the Dunhuang night market, very hot, but bustling and very nice, very pretty, very clean. Here's the Minsha Mountains. Oops, sorry about that. So there's another picture, but here's the Minsha Mountains. Beautiful, right? Look at this huge desert. Yeah, camels. Oh no, where'd it go? Hold on. For some reason, my screen is not sharing anymore. That's strange. Maybe it wasn't sharing that whole time. Let me see. Going back. Okay, you should see it now. So, all right, let me go backwards. All right, let me go backwards. So, all right, here's the night market. As I said before, beautiful place. Very fun too. Very cheap. Very fun. Just go there. Dunhuang is known for dry fruit, so you can get a lot of really nice dry fruit there. Here you have the Minsha Mountains, which is really a desert, and it's beautiful. So there's just a scene. There are camels, there are horses. Very interesting, very sunny, but the view is beautiful. Stunning. It's stunning. It was just beautiful. Stunning. Here is the head of the publicity department of Gansu province. She actually studied in the United States for about a year. She did a study abroad here, and she had a lot of choice words for me. She told me, you need to tell the United States that you need to tell people in the United States what the real China is like. It's nothing like what the Western media says. It was very interesting to speak to someone like her, and to meet someone like her who very official capacity. She really was there to present to us what Gansu province, a very poor province in China, I believe second lowest GDP in all of China, but fast developing. And she told us about all the things that they're doing to use culture as a mechanism for economic development. Here is Dana Burton, who I said, Black American from Detroit, hip hop extraordinaire, someone who makes money through his own business, hip hop. So he met me at my hotel. There he is. He took me around for a night. That was fun. There's the club we were at. Somebody asked about the music in the chat. This is in Shanghai now. I met Dana in Shanghai. The music, it's a lot like American and Western music, I believe. It was, techno and old. Actually, there was a lot of old hits, like a little old R&B pop hits. I remember Pony by what's his name? Oh man, I forget his name, but it was, it was a fun time. It was interesting. And here I will tell you about these two wonderful young people. They are two of the folks. So this is Shanghai in the background at the top of the Pearl Tower. If you're afraid, no sound. Is somebody saying no sound? Did I lose my sound? This is why I need a new laptop. Somebody said no sound. Let me know. Sound check, sound check, sound check. Genuine. Oh yeah, Genuine. That was his name. Give me a sound check. Okay, everybody can hear. All right. So that must just be one person then. Okay. So, these two, they were they're part of the staff of the Chinese Association for International Understanding. They were helping us as a delegation, and I spent a lot of time with them. All throughout the cities. And I'll just tell you their stories, or at least their impressions. Very young, very committed. They're members of the Communist Party of China. Now, not everyone is a member of the Communist Party of China in China, but they are. And so I got to have a lot of conversations with them about what it was like. What does it mean for them? And so for both of them, they both come from more underdeveloped provinces. And they both joined the party because they wanted to give back to the country. They wanted to develop the country. And they believed, after reading Xi Jinping's works, studying him, studying their leader, they believe that his vision is exactly what younger people and really all of China needs to become stronger, and that they're at a stage where China is seeking to become stronger, not just seeking to become independent like the first stage, or to become more economically prosperous, as in the second stage, where we look at the Mao period, the Deng period, but actually to become strong, to become a country that can stand on its own feet. And so they want to be part of that process. And so speaking to them, I got to learn a lot about what it's like to be a young person in the party, what do they have to study, how dedicated they have to be. And I got to learn some interesting things about sort of the intricacies of what it means to serve people in China. And so, of course, they are dedicating their time now to facilitating international exchanges as one way to bolster the strength of China, right? People need to see China, and they want to help make that happen. Now, here in the middle, this gentleman, and I'm going to refrain from using names for a lot of these folks because, on the one hand, their names, I only memorize their Chinese names. And to be honest, they're very difficult to pronounce, and I do not want to butcher them. But also, I also don't want to identify them in a way here in the media. Just know that I was there with them. And so, and that they're good friends now. Plus, I didn't ask permission to cover this for them, and I find that to be important. So I'm just going to keep them anonymous without their consent. So with all that said, these folks, these party members, they had a lot of interest in this. First of all, here in the middle here, he hated Shanghai, and he did not like how Western it is. I mean, he's been there before. He didn't like how Western it is. He finds a lot of Shanghainese very ungrateful. He said, and I mean, it was all very valid stuff, right? Because there is a lot of worship of the West, more so than maybe in other parts of China. And he called it the Shanghai city disease, where there are a lot of Shanghainese, they speak another language. They do have more affinity toward the West. And they also have maybe feelings about the party that are less amenable. And so I found that to be a funny story based on his experience. And here, this gentleman on the left, or on the far right, probably your right if you're watching. No, it's probably your left if you're watching this. My right in the picture. He, he had a lot of interesting stories about what it means to be a young person in the Communist Party of China. He also told me about some of the contradictions that they're dealing with. For example, housing prices, because he's been very invested in this as a young person who is dating someone. Eventually, he might want to get married. He might want to have a house. And he's like, I can't do that in Beijing where he lives. And so he was talking about the contradictions about that, about the rising housing prices, what the government is doing. He told me about a policy about how the government is requiring developers to have a certain portion of the buildings be for people of lower incomes, where the prices for whether it's mortgage rates or whether it's rentals, that the prices have to be within affordability for people with lower incomes. So entire buildings have to be dedicated. Unlike in the US or maybe some Western countries where it's mainly tax breaks, and it's just based on maybe median income. This is based on actual income, and the buildings themselves have to be dedicated a portion. He also talked about how there is there's an interesting phenomenon in China that many people don't understand. Because I was asking about working hours, because a lot of young people, especially in the tech industry, work very hard, especially young professionals, but also in the factories too. There can be a culture of overwork, maybe. And so I asked him about that because there's a lot of criticisms about that. For example, at Foxconn. And while he wasn't familiar with Foxconn, he was very familiar with, for example, 996 culture. He was also familiar within the factories how people can work 10, 12 hours a day. And how a lot of those who work, they come from the countryside to make a lot of money, so they can go back to the countryside with a lot of money. And we had a conversation about that, and he made a really good point. Number one, he said that China and Chinese people, a lot of it is voluntary, that people can live, right? They may not live exactly as rich as they want to. Maybe they won't live the very luxurious city life that you can in places like Beijing and Shanghai, but you can live in China without working, let's say 996, without working 12 hours a day, for example. And you don't have to, right? So you don't have to work the 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. That's what 996 stands for. A lot of tech companies are encouraging that kind of labor. It's very difficult work. But, you don't necessarily have to. However, there is a culture of high expectations. Parents can put it on. There is a culture of, well, we've gotten here. Now we have to get further. And that does have its excesses. But he said it's not necessarily something you need to do. But it is, he said he understands that it can be a difficult choice for young people. Either you make a lot of money working grueling jobs, or you make less money. Maybe you have a lesser standard of living. Maybe it's not looked upon as maybe as well, but you're not going to, let's say, go hungry, for example. But he said also that there is a phenomenon they're still dealing with in China, and that is the fact that China is rapidly developing. When we're talking about 70 years, right? 70 plus years of developing, let's say, a socialist independent country. But in that 70 years, only about 30 of those years has China been maybe an industrialized country. And really only in the last 10 to 20 years has it been a prosperous country. So we're talking about a very new phenomenon. And still, many people who come from the countryside have many different opinions about work and about how hard you work and about how long you should work. There are many who think that they need to work as much as they can, right? They kind of have that countryside mentality of you need to work as much as you can to make as much money so you can survive. There is that strand of thought. There also is among some people, and this is where actually he was saying a lot of people can fall through the cracks, is that they don't want to work, or they don't want to work as hard as maybe they need to, or maybe, just maybe, they don't want to work at all. And that the rapid development of China has kind of gone beyond what they feel is their capabilities, whether it's educationally, whether it is just in terms of the kind of labor. It's not that they don't have access to it, that they couldn't do it, they can't do it. It's just that they voluntarily say, no, I don't want to do it. This isn't my way. This is my culture. This isn't how I grew up in the countryside, etc. And they end up falling through the cracks. That can be many, many people. And so he said one of the big missions of the Communist Party of China in the period of growing prosperity as they reach this modern socialist country level is to tackle relative poverty. And a lot of that is still going to the countryside and even going around the cities and talking to people that are kind of falling through the cracks because whether it's for mental health reasons, whether it's for choice, right? Not wanting to work certain kinds of jobs. They're going around, they're saying, they're going to try to help people get a job, maybe go home to the countryside. That's one thing a lot of people don't understand about China as well. yes, not everyone lives rich and not everyone has the same standard of living. Everyone can live a decent standard of living in many cases because everyone has the option to go back to their village. And China is pouring many resources into the countryside in order to develop there. So while China works on getting cities in the countryside to a more even development level, it is also having to work on those people that may fall through the cracks because of how rapidly the cities are developing, how many people come into the cities for work, and how some of those people may not be fit to work in these jobs, may not want to work in these jobs, whether it's factories, whether it's tech work, etc. Whether they become ill, whether they become sick, mentally ill, right? Because it's destabilizing. So these are the contradictions of socialism. And he said a lot of the government's work now is finding people who are in this situation and trying to encourage them to work in what way they can, trying to help them, right? So he said, his partner actually, she's a public servant in Beijing, and she does a lot of just door knocking all over the neighborhood, asking people what they need, what they do, where they are in life, how can the party help them, and what resources are available, how to get people Social Security and income and housing if they need it. That's a big mission of the party. So it's let's just say it was very interesting talking to them, and I had a great conversation. And here's Shanghai, beautiful place. Some people it's not their vibe. There's light shows. Some people don't like this, but I had a really good time watching the light shows and going on Huangpu River. And here is two luminaries that I met. Fernando Leon Jacamino, who is the Vice Minister of Culture in Cuba. He was the other panelist host of a conversation with Yang Jiechi, former top diplomat of China, his brother, Yang Jiemin. And we had a conversation about China's path to modernization at the Shanghai Institutes for International Studies. I asked him a question about multipolarity and how China's path to modernization fits in with its commitment to international law. And he ended up going on what I found to be a very enjoyable analysis of how the U.S. has to become just any other country. That is its destiny. It can no longer act like a hegemon if it's going to live in this world peacefully and stably. And he said that until that decision is made, that it's going to have a lot of difficulties, and it's difficulties that China is going to have to navigate as it moves along this path. And that's why multipolarity, one of the reasons why multipolarity is so important to China. So really interesting conversation. And I love Fernando Jacamino, even though he couldn't speak much English and I don't speak much Spanish. I hope that we can connect again. We talked about maybe me coming to Cuba at some point in the near future, and maybe doing some of the similar kind of work I did while I was here in China, documenting, doing video interviews, etc. So I look forward to that. Great guy. I mean, a poet, storyteller, a writer, amazing, and a very just sweet guy. I mean, 100% Cuban socialist, Cuban revolutionary, just like sweetest guy, very serious and very smart. We talked about Fidel. We talked about his background. It was very cool. And this was a great photo in Shanghai. So this is actually the building. I think this says like spirit of the people or something to that effect. And maybe that's the wrong translation, but something spirit. And this is a little girl. I want to zoom in. Look at her face, first of all. So she was saluting for her family, taking a picture, and I had to get a picture. And obviously she was a little perturbed by that, but it was just too sweet of a moment watching this little girl salute to the founding building of the Communist Party of China in Shanghai. And just a great moment. I mean, I just walked into that. It's so unbelievably cute and wonderful to see. And that's the spirit. I mean, this little girl, I mean, how old? I don't know, 9, 8, maybe 10 at the most, if lucky. But somebody said spiritual road, so spiritual path. So there you go. Thank you for the translation. So there you go. And then let's see if there's any more photos. Here's me and Andy Borum at the same location, just by the park area. Very humid and hot. There I am in front of the founding place of the Communist Party of China. Those of you who don't know the story, they met as 12 people and 2 Soviet assistants. They were actually caught by, this is the French Quarter, so they were actually caught by French authorities in league with their collaborators. At this time, you may know that the collective West was putting China through a century of humiliation, and that the West arguably controlled a lot of Shanghai because it was where the settlement houses were, the banks, along the Bund. And so they were caught and they had to run away, 12 people. They had to take a boat and regroup. And a lot of them actually, KMT eventually assassinated. So a very sad story, but it ended up being a very heartfelt and beautiful one because they won in the end and the collective West lost. And that's why China forever remains a nightmare to Western hegemony. And I want to show you this really quick. You might not be able to read this very well. Hopefully you can. Actually, you can. The Belt and Road Lane. So here I am in Shanghai, stressing out because I thought I was going to be late. So China still has, I will say, I would like China to get rid of the health declaration, not because I think China should do it, but it was very hard to remember to do the health declaration. It's like a form online, basically saying you don't have any symptoms. But either get rid of it or make it a little bit easier for me or for tourists like myself. Look, it's not really a huge criticism, mind you. It was just frustrating because I kept, and it partly my fault, kept forgetting to fill it out. Try to do it at the airport, do it on WeChat, the Chinese app that I've had for years. And it's so buggy. You have to move the puzzle piece to show you're not a bot into the puzzle area. It never worked. And some of it was my fault, honestly, because I should have just asked an airport worker to help me from the get-go, because I eventually did, and she just helped me, and it was so easy, and they let me cut the line because I was in line and had to figure it out on the sidelines as the line was moving through security. So I should have just done that earlier, but I tried to figure it out on my own, almost was late to my flight. Nonetheless, here it is, Shanghai Airport, and I thought this was interesting. So many of you may know, here's the Belt and Road Lane. So this lane exists in many Chinese airports, if not all of them at this point. And essentially what it is, it's a special security area, special customs area for people coming to the Belt and Road Initiative countries. And they get special priority. I got to say that line was moving real fast. So if you think China is not prioritizing the global south, you have not seen the Belt and Road Lane, because I saw it and they were moving through that lane very quickly while we other folks were in a big long line trying to get through security. So I just found that really interesting, showing the commitment of China to the Belt and Road Initiative, which I cover a lot here. And let's see, is there any more photos? No, I think that might have been it. Yes, that was it. So long stream today, guys. Long stream. long stream. But it was a fruitful one, a beautiful one. And I'm glad I got to show you these photos. I didn't get to show you everything about China in this trip. I will be rolling more photos out. I was sharing specially with Patreon and Substack subscribers throughout the trip, because that's I had some time to do that, and I try to get some exclusive paid content. What I want to say is that it was a beautiful trip. I got to see China again. Very quick, but still very inspiring to see people's standard of living. A really decent standard of living. Really decent. People are living better than they do in the collective West at this point. And also I got to see all the contradictions. It is a struggle. It is not a straight path. It is not easy. I got to see, right, the contradictions of lifting people out of poverty while at the same time spurring investment that does lead to cities with high costs, right? But I got to also see how the government keeps things from getting out of control so that everybody can enjoy a higher standard of living, so that the life that people are experiencing, the better life can be experienced by all to a certain degree. And so, China really follows the path that Karl Marx laid out when talking about the stages of socialism. China calls us the primary stage of socialism, which Karl Marx outlined was to each according to their work. It is not a fully equal society. It does not mean everyone has the same things, but it does mean that there are certain political conditions and policies, and especially a lot of state-controlled industries and leadership of a communist party, which help ensure that people are paid according to their work, and that the excesses of capitalism are curbed to the point where people can both be highly productive while also living a better life. That is the difference between here and the rest in the collective, between China and the collective West. Because in the collective West, what you have is you have development at the expense of the vast majority. You have productivity not going along with wages. You have infrastructure declining. None of that exists in China. And if you go there, you see. You can never imagine paying less than 50 cents for a train ride in the United States. You couldn't imagine paying less than $20 to go 35 miles in a taxi. It just doesn't exist, right? So, you get to see these things. You get to hear people talk about their lives improving. You get to see the spirit that people have, the confidence. You get to see the faith in their government and in the Communist Party, their ruling leadership. They consider that democracy, to be able to trust their leadership to do the right thing and to be able to get involved at whatever level that they want, if at all. And there are many mechanisms for being involved, not least becoming a member of the party, but you don't even have to. You can participate in local politics, the ground level, village level. You can. But it's not the same as the US or the West. You're not going to be electing Xi Jinping to president. No. Who elects him? It is the biggest national body of the country, along with the Central Committee, the Politburo of the Communist Party of China. That's who elects him, both as general secretary of the party and then as president. That's the system you have. You have villages electing deputies for municipalities, electing deputies for provinces, electing deputies for the National Assembly or National People's Congress, and electing the higher body officials like the president, Xi Jinping. That's what you have there. And you also, the commitment to renewable energy, I didn't even get to show. I went to a solar farm in Dhaiphong that provides basically the entire city and the entire province and Xinjiang as well with its renewable energy capacity. And it was very interesting to see that level of investment, to see the electric vehicles, to see the high-speed rail. I only took one on the way to the airport, but you see it. Everyone talks about it. They talk about how it's preferable to flying. They talk about the impact on the environment. They talk about how it's just better for commerce. And then the commitment to foreign policy at this conference, which was very interesting. The commitment to self-determination, the commitment to sovereignty. It was a beautiful trip, and I'm very glad I went. Again, though, too short. But I do plan on going back. I do have people I did not get to meet, friends of this show, like Alex over at Reportify Media. Next time I'm there, we're meeting. And there are many others as well that I can't even think of right now. So what's beautiful about this trip is that, one, I got to meet Communist Party members. I didn't get to do that in my first trip. I got to travel around with high-level officials, people who are there to conduct high-level business with China, political, economic, or otherwise. And I also got to see China much more closely in this trip because I wasn't just a tourist. I was there as a delegate. I was supposed to see the bustling business tourism of Gansu province. I was supposed to see what Shanghai is doing to try to level inequalities. I was meeting with officials. I was meeting with people who have a huge impact on the political and economic life of the country. And so it inspired me to do more of that because, as I was walking around Lanzhou, for example, it was like, wow, there's so much to learn, not just about China, but about its global role. And that's what the conference really taught me, is that there's so many elements. You're talking about civilizations, culture, you're talking about politics and economics and military, foreign policy, global security initiative, the global development initiative that China has, all this economic, military, politics, culture. This is China's rise to global leadership. First, and I got to see it firsthand, just how influential it is. 400 people, 90+% of those, 99% of those were from the global south. I got to see it firsthand what it means for these countries to be in the Belt and Road Initiative. Hear it from their mouths. Hear it from people. These aren't politicians. Many of them were just people who study it, people who live it, right? Presentations from people, for example, in Thailand, talking about what it's meant for the Belt and Road Initiative in their country to help them build key infrastructure, including a high-speed rail project that I know Brian Berletic has talked about on my program. So it's not perfect. And so it's so funny that people try to profess that that's what I claim. No. This isn't about perfection. This isn't about purity. This is about progress. This is about what it means for a new epicenter to be developing on the world stage, a new epicenter for development on all levels on the world stage. What does it mean? What prospects does it bring? Is there positives we can take out of it? And indeed, there are so many. And believe it when I say that the Chinese people are well equipped to resolve their own problems. And that's one lesson you get pretty hard and fast while you're there. So I'm going to go back again at some point, hopefully soon. But until then, I'll continue to talk about this trip, hopefully share more on social media and the like. But before you go, I want to just point you to supporting my work on Patreon. Before you go, patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. That's the best place to help support things like this, these initiatives. It helps support also this tech drive that I'm about to do. I'm going to get a new laptop. I think part of the lag here is because of the computer that I have. So I'm getting a new one. So all that requires funds, helping support the people that support me, as well as supporting myself in this work. So please do subscribe on Patreon. Substack is also a good option. One-time options in the video description. And of course, become a YouTube member. I want to first, before I go, give a shout out to the Super Chats, which is also a great way to support Valley, who's also a member. Thank you so much. H89, thank you so much. Appreciate, Valley, that you said I was missed. Anna, appreciate your donation. And then Rob Janot says, how are Chinese primary and secondary education structured? Different similarities to the Western systems? Wow, that's a big question. Primary and secondary education. I mean, I think it's free up until 9th grade. I believe that's free compulsory education. There is similarities in the sense that there's like a private system, a public system. It's a uniform system. I know that. I would say that the investment is just really intense. And I think one of the big issues that China has been dealing with is while their education system has been very effective, children are more literate than ever before. Young people are joining really high-level fields than ever before. There's a lot of intense pressure and competitiveness in these schools, even at the lower levels, leading into the higher levels. And so there's been a lot of cracking down on, for example, the private school industry, private tutoring industry. Families were paying tens of thousands of RMB to tutors who were then basically ripping them off, private tutors, to prepare them for these tests, like the is it the Gaokang, I think it's called, that the major test to get into the major universities, preparing, just ripping people off. And so China's cracked down, banned that industry, has started to reduce homework for certain grade levels. So I think that's the thing. I mean, I'm sure there are many other differences I'm just not aware of. We didn't really talk much about schools on this trip. It was like a civilizations dialogue trip. But very good question. China's a very highly educated place, but yeah, it's become so highly competitive. There's lots of stress involved in that. For example, the 2 CPC members on the trip, young people, talked about their college experiences, their schooling experiences. They said, yeah, stress is a big part of it. Studying a lot. They said not a lot of time for socializing, not a lot of time to maybe be someone who does more than just study. And so that that causes its problems, even if it has, of course, its advantages. It's that like ultra discipline that has been built out of the need to develop the country, commit to rising up, all of that. And education, you could argue education was always a high level emphasis in China even before the Chinese Revolution, but I think it even increased after that time, just because you had a lot of uneducated people and you had not a lot of time to catch up. Chinese leadership made it their, how should I say, a prerogative to develop very, very, very fast, because there was a fear that due to Western isolation and due to whatever internal contradictions that might mount inside because of that, or out not because of that, that China would not be able to remain independent and socialist. So I think that there was kind of a snowballing effect of really placing a priority of education so that people could get out of illiteracy and also start to become prepared to build a new China, and in a very small amount of time. And so you can just tell from the younger people that I spoke with, where it's like, it's very intense. It's like, you got to do it. You got to work hard. If you're not working hard, what are you doing? Gao Kao is the killer examination, not Gao Kong, Gao Kao. All right, guys, I've been on for a really long time. Support my work. I may not be live. I have Richard Wolf coming on the 17th. Then maybe the next time I'm live, because I'm going to go the 17th. Then I have the 18th with Brian Berletic. Then I have the 20th on Brian Berletic's show. And then I have some time off. So a lot of live streams coming up. So I may not be live on Saturday. We'll see. I was thinking about coming back on again, but I don't know. With that said, everybody, it was good to be with all of you tonight. Please support my work. You know what to do. Like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell. Those are all free. And the best way to support my work economically, so that I can be sustainable in the short, medium, and long term, patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. Get that annual option. Substack as well. YouTube membership as well. And one-time options in the video description. Peace out. Take care. And until next time, as you can tell, I got this third wind. I'm so jet lagged. I got this third wind. I'm like falling asleep at 3 p.m. and getting a third wind at midnight. So that's why I'm still here. But I am leaving now. Until next time, salute. And I will see you all again on the next stream.